February 1258. Baghdad is already finished. The fires just haven't reached every street yet. Inside the treasury, Caliph al-Mustasim is being marched past gold he never used. Gold stacked higher than the men who died defending walls he never reinforced. The guards beside him are not his. They watch his face, waiting for the moment he understands. This walk is not ceremonial, it is final. Outside, the city burns. Inside, the fountains are dry. In Baghdad, that only happens when power is already dead. Al-Mustasim is the successor of prophets, ruler of the richest city on earth, centre of a civilization that believed itself permanent. Before the next call to prayer, his body will be gone. Not executed, not judged, not remembered as a man. What happens next, to him and to his family, is not for mercy, it is for witnesses, because the Mongols did not come to take Baghdad. They came to make sure no ruler ever forgets what happens when power mistakes gold for strength. And when the gates fall, the world will learn, too late, that nothing sacred survives force. For 5 centuries, Baghdad had been the axis of the world, not merely of an empire, but of thought itself. This was the city where Greek philosophy met Persian astronomy, where Indian mathematics fused with Islamic law, where knowledge accumulated into libraries, cataloguing everything from medicine to mechanics. The House of Wisdom alone held texts that would take 3 lifetimes to read. Al-Khwarizmi developed algebra here. Al-Razi composed medical works Europe would not translate for 400 years. Scholars crossed deserts from Spain to Samarkand just to study within Baghdad's walls. The city's population exceeded 1 million. Water flowed through underground canals engineered generations earlier. Markets traded goods from China to Cordoba. Hospitals treated patients, regardless of faith or wealth. This was not Rome in decline. This was a civilization functioning at full capacity, and ruling over it stood the Caliph. Not merely a king, not merely a political authority. The Caliph was the successor to Muhammad, spiritual leader to millions, a legitimacy stretching back 37 generations. Al-Mustasim inherited that title in 1242. He also inherited something else, a state that had been quietly rotting for 2 centuries. The Abbasid Caliphate still commanded religious authority, but its armies were largely mercenary forces. Its governors were semi-independent warlords. Its treasury overflowed, yet little of it was spent on defence. Because Baghdad had survived weakness before, it had endured civil wars, it had outlasted rival caliphs. It had watched empires rise and collapse around it, while its scholars kept writing and its markets kept trading. So when reports arrived from the east, Baghdad noticed and waited. Horsemen had erased the Khwarezmian Empire. Horsemen had emptied Persian cities. Horsemen who did not stop for rivers, mountains, or negotiated borders. Baghdad took note and then did nothing. Because the Mongols were not an army, they were a mechanism, a system refined over 50 years of continuous warfare across frozen steppe, desert, and mountain. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, he left behind more than territory. He left behind doctrine, a method that turned conquest into repeatable process. And one of his grandsons, Hulagu Khan, was assigned to carry it west. In 1253, the Mongol Kurultai gave him a clear directive: secure submission from every state between Mongolia and the Mediterranean. Not defeat submission, because the Mongol Empire was not built on occupation. It was built on compliance. Cities that submitted early retained autonomy. Their rulers remained in power. Their people lived. They paid tribute. They acknowledged Mongol supremacy. Cities that refused stopped existing. Every target received the same sequence. Messengers arrived. Written terms were presented. Submit immediately. Send tribute. Provide hostages, usually sons of rulers. Accept Mongol authority. Compliance meant survival. Walls remained standing. Markets stayed open. Populations lived. Refusal triggered nothing at first. No threats, no ultimatums, only silence. Weeks passed. sometimes months. Life inside the city continued. Defenders began to assume the Mongols had moved on. Then the horizon filled with horsemen, not scattered, not chaotic. Formations moved with precision. Siege engines arrived on wagons. The army did not attack. It surrounded every gate, every road, every escape route. Then construction began. In full view of the defenders, siege engines were assembled. Trebuchets, capable of hurling stones, weighing hundreds of pounds. Engineers from China and Persia worked alongside Mongol soldiers. The defenders watched machines being built, specifically to dismantle their walls. A second embassy arrived. The terms were repeated, word for word. This was the final chance. Most cities surrendered here. If refusal continued, the siege began, not as chaos, as procedure. Walls fell in calculated sections. Infantry advanced in units. Cavalry secured routes. Once inside, populations were sorted, artisans identified and spared, scholars identified and spared, engineers identified and spared. Everyone else was gathered outside the city. What followed was recorded by multiple sources. It was not random violence, it was systematic elimination. Survivors were resettled across Mongol territories. Cities were burned, not as punishment, but as evidence. Because the Mongols did not conquer for land. They conquered for compliance. And every destroyed city became instruction for the next. By 1257, Hulagu had applied this system across Persia. Nishapur refused, eliminated. Merv refused, depopulated. Herat refused, reduced to ruins. Refusal carried consequences that echoed for generations. And now, Hulagu turned toward the greatest city between Persia and Egypt, Baghdad. In September 1257, Mongol envoys arrived. 3 riders, 1 letter. You know what befell the cities of Persia. You know the price of refusal. Present yourself at our camp. Submit to the authority of the great Khan. Dismantle your fortifications. Send your sons as hostages. Do this, and your city will be spared. Refuse, and you will learn what the others learned. The letter reached the Caliph's court on a Thursday. By Friday, the arguments had begun. Caliph al-Mustasim summoned his advisors, and the room fractured almost immediately. His vizier, Ibn al-Alqami, spoke first. He urged immediate compliance. He did not appeal to fear, he appealed to evidence. The Khwarezmian Empire had fielded 400,000 soldiers. They had fortified cities. They had mountain strongholds. All of it was gone. Nishapur's walls had been 30 feet thick. Merv had been called the city the world depends on. Both are razed. These are not raiders, Ibn al-Alqami warned. This is a military system refined over 50 years of continuous warfare. We cannot defeat them. We can only survive them. His recommendation was clear. Immediate submission, full payment of tribute, open Baghdad's gates before a siege could begin. The head of Baghdad's army rejected the proposal. The Mongols, he argued, were steppe cavalry. They dominated open terrain. Baghdad's walls had never been breached. The Mongols had little experience besieging a fully prepared city, and they were far from their supply base. They cannot sustain a siege in hostile territory, he insisted. A third faction entered the debate, the theologians. Baghdad was the seat of the caliphate, the symbolic center of Islamic civilization. God would not permit pagans to destroy the lineage of the Prophet. They spoke with certainty. Al-Mustasim listened. He was 54 years old. He had ruled for 16 years. He had never faced a military crisis of this scale. Contemporary accounts describe him as fond of luxury, devoted to scholarship, uneasy with military affairs, a man who trusted the authority of his position. He studied Hulagu's letter, then he looked at his advisors, and he decided, "We are the caliphate," he said. "We do not submit to threats from horsemen." The envoys were dismissed. No tribute would be sent. No preparations would be made. Ibn al-Alqami tried once more. "If we refuse," he said, "they will come." "Then let them come," al-Mustasim replied. The envoys departed Baghdad on September the 24th, 1257. They carried no response, only confirmation of refusal. What followed mattered more than the refusal itself. The Caliph did not mobilize the army. He did not reinforce the walls. He did not open the treasury to fund defences. Instead, life at court continued as usual, as though the threat might dissolve through neglect. Meanwhile, 300 miles to the east, Hulagu's army began to move. November 11th, 1257. Mongol advance forces appeared 30 miles east of Baghdad. Scouts reported back. Cavalry units, perhaps 5,000 horsemen, no siege engines visible. Baghdad's military commander saw opportunity. If the Mongol detachment was small and isolated, it could be destroyed in open terrain. A decisive victory would restore confidence and discourage further advance. He recommended immediate action. The Caliph agreed. On November 13th, Baghdad's field army marched east. 20,000 men, 12,000 cavalry, 8,000 infantry. The largest force the Caliphate had assembled in decades. They carried provisions for 3 days. The plan was straightforward. Intercept the Mongol advance force, engage in open battle, destroy it before reinforcements could arrive. Return to Baghdad victorious. November 15th, 1257, the armies met 25 miles northeast of the city. Baghdad's commander deployed his troops traditionally, cavalry on the wings, infantry at the centre. Across the field, the Mongol force appeared smaller than expected, perhaps 4,000 horsemen. Baghdad's cavalry charged. What happened next was recorded only by survivors. The Mongol line retreated, not in panic but in coordination. Units withdrew in order. Baghdad's cavalry pursued, 1 mile, then 2, still organised. Then the flanks emerged. Mongol cavalry, hidden in northern and southern gullies, surged forward simultaneously. Baghdad's cavalry found itself surrounded, not by 4,000 horsemen, but by 15,000. Mongol cavalry archers fired at full gallop, composite bows punching through armour at 200 yards. Baghdad's formations collapsed. From their position, the infantry watched the cavalry wings vanish into the Mongol mass. They began retreating toward Baghdad. The Mongols did not pursue. They encircled the remaining cavalry and eliminated them methodically. By nightfall, it was finished. Of the 20,000 men who had marched out, fewer than 3,000 returned. The Caliph's personal guard was gone, the mercenary cavalry destroyed. Baghdad's field army no longer existed, not routed and not scattered, erased. When survivors reached the court, the nature of the threat became undeniable. This was not a raid, it was a trap. A small force had drawn Baghdad's army into the open and annihilated it with precision. By December, the main Mongol host appeared on the horizon. Baghdad's walls were all that remained. January 11th, 1258, the Mongol army completed its encirclement of Baghdad. Hulagu commanded an estimated 150,000 soldiers. They did not merely surround the city, they built infrastructure. Fortified camps rose at every gate. Guard rotations were organised, supply lines stretched back to Persia, escape became impossible. Siege engines were assembled, not hidden, but in full view of the walls. Chinese engineers worked beside Mongol soldiers. Trebuchets were constructed with geometric precision. Day after day, Baghdad's defenders watched. They could see exactly what was being built. They could calculate exactly what it would do. On January 17th, Hulagu sent another embassy. The message had changed. The time for full submission had passed, but the Caliph might still preserve his life. Open the gates, present yourself, order your garrison to disarm. Do this within 3 days, and the population would be spared. The Caliph convened his remaining advisors. The pragmatist vizier spoke again. "We have no field army," he said. "No allies are coming. There is nothing left to stop what stands outside our walls." The religious scholars continued to invoke divine protection. The Caliph hesitated. 3 days passed. No response was sent. January 29th. At dawn, the trebuchets opened fire. Not randomly, not for intimidation, systematically. Mongol engineers had spent 2 weeks calculating wall thickness, identifying structural weaknesses, measuring optimal angles of impact. The stones struck the same sections again and again. Each impact produced micro-fractures in masonry that had stood for 5 centuries. The bombardment continued for 8 hours. Then it stopped. The Mongols waited. Overnight, the damaged sections weakened further under their own weight. February 1st. The bombardment resumed, focused entirely on the compromised areas. By afternoon, cracks were visible from inside the city. By evening, the eastern wall began to fail. February 5th, the eastern wall collapsed. A 90-foot section disintegrated completely. Mongol infantry advanced toward the breach. They did not charge. They walked in formation. They entered Baghdad in units, secured the breach, established a perimeter, and advanced block by block. Baghdad's remaining garrison attempted to hold the opening. By nightfall, the Mongols controlled the eastern quarter of the city. February 10th. The Caliph sent an envoy to Hulagu's camp. The message was brief. I will surrender personally. I will open the gates. I will order my garrison to disarm. Spare the city. Hulagu's reply arrived within hours. Present yourself at my camp tomorrow, alone. February 13th, 1258. The Caliph walked out of Baghdad. He did not go alone. He brought 3,000 members of the court. His sons, ministers, scholars, and generals. They passed through the gate unarmed. Mongol guards flanked them immediately, not threatening, simply present. The procession moved through the Mongol camp. Soldiers watched in silence. No insults, no violence, no visible anger, only observation. Hulagu received the Caliph in his command tent. His first question was practical. Where is your treasury? The Caliph hesitated. We are prepared to offer tribute. Where is it? Directions were given. Hulagu sent soldiers to confirm. They returned 3 hours later. The vault had been opened. What they found was undeniable. Gold ingots, thousands of them. Silver coins stacked in chests. Jewels accumulated across generations. Silk enough to clothe an army. Hulagu ordered the entire treasury documented. Then he ordered the Caliph brought there. The Caliph was led back into Baghdad through streets now under Mongol control. Past buildings beginning to smoulder. To his own treasury, the doors stood open. Hulagu walked him through, room after room, vault after vault. They did not speak. They did not need to. The questions hung in the air unspoken. Why was this wealth stored here while the walls collapsed? Why were soldiers unpaid while gold sat untouched? Why was this treasure locked away while the city prepared for nothing? What happened next is recorded differently across sources. The Persian historian Rashid al-Din writes that Hulagu ordered the Caliph to consume his gold, to eat the wealth he had valued more than his people's survival. Whether this occurred literally is debated. What followed is not. The Mongols adhered to Tengrist spiritual beliefs. One of their core taboos was clear. Royal blood must not touch the ground. To spill it directly invited cosmic imbalance. So when executing nobility, alternatives were required. For the Caliph, they chose a specific method. He was wrapped tightly in a carpet. The bundle was laid on the ground outside the treasury. Horses were brought forward. They did not trample at random, and they were led, slowly, deliberately, across the wrapped body, again and again. The weight crushed what lay inside. No blade was drawn. No sentence was announced. No proclamation was made. When it ended, the Caliph was dead. No blood had touched the earth. The taboo was satisfied. But something else had been created, a method that would be discussed in courts from Anatolia to Delhi, a death that carried meaning beyond execution. The Caliph's sons were separated from the group, all of them. Contemporary sources agree they were executed the same day. Some accounts state they were wrapped and crushed as well. Others suggest they were killed out of sight. What does not vary is the result. All died, no heirs survived. The Caliph's daughters were taken away. Their fate is recorded only vaguely. Some sources claim they were distributed among Mongol officers. Others say they were sent east into Mongol territory. After February 13th, they disappear from detailed record. The 3,000 who had walked out with the Caliph were divided. Those with useful skills were identified and removed. The rest were executed outside the city. That day, the Abbasid dynasty ended. 5 centuries of continuous rule, no succession followed, no recovery occurred. A lineage stretching back 37 generations to the Prophet's uncle was severed, and the news spread before the bodies were cold. They were marked and removed to camps outside the city. Valuables were collected with precision. Gold, silver, jewels, silk, spices and manuscripts. Everything of value was catalogued and taken. Everyone else was driven beyond the walls. What followed is described across multiple sources. The elimination was methodical. Contemporary chroniclers claim anywhere from 200,000 to 1 million killed. Modern historians suggest a lower figure, likely between 90,000 and 200,000. What is not disputed is the aftermath. Once the population was dealt with, the city itself became the target. The House of Wisdom was set ablaze. Manuscripts were thrown into the Tigris. So many books were cast into the river that it was said to run black with ink. The Grand Mosque was partially demolished. The Caliph's palace was torn down. The canal system was deliberately damaged. This was not random destruction. It was calculated, intended to ensure Baghdad could not recover quickly. On February 20th, Hulagu ordered his army to withdraw. They left behind a city with entire neighbourhoods erased, a population reduced by at least half, but they also left something else: survivors. Survivors who could tell others what they had seen. Because the Mongols did not want Baghdad forgotten. They wanted it remembered. Within weeks, the story reached Damascus. Within months, it reached Cairo. Within a year, every court from Anatolia to India knew exactly what had happened. Not merely that Baghdad had fallen, but how, and what had been done to the man who believed himself untouchable. After February 1258, something shifted across the Islamic world. Cities that had been preparing resistance reversed course. Damascus opened its gates before the Mongols arrived. Aleppo sent tribute and hostages in advance. Smaller emirates across Syria and Iraq submitted without ever seeing a Mongol soldier, because Baghdad had not simply been destroyed, it had been demonstrated. Rulers everywhere performed the same calculation. Resist and face a siege you cannot win. Watch your city burn, die wrapped in a carpet while your family disappears, or submit, retain your throne, pay tribute, survive. The equation was unmistakable. The Mongol expansion was finally halted in 1260 at the Battle of Ain Jalut. The Mamluks, a military state based in Egypt, defeated a Mongol army in open combat. But even they had learned from Baghdad. They did not rely on walls. They did not trust sacred authority alone. They built their society around a single purpose, creating a force capable of meeting the Mongols in the field. They studied the Mongol system. They adapted elements of it. They prepared specifically for that confrontation, because they understood what Baghdad had not. The Mongols were not raiders you could wait out. They were a system you had to match. Baghdad survived as a city. People returned, markets reopened, trade resumed, but it never regained its position. The centre of Islamic civilization shifted elsewhere. The House of Wisdom was never rebuilt. The accumulated knowledge was never reassembled. The scholars who died were never replaced, yet something endured. The memory of what defiance cost, long after Hulagu's death, long after the Mongol Empire fractured, long after the steppe fell silent. The shape of Baghdad's fall remained, preserved in chronicles, repeated in courtrooms, recalled whenever advisors debated resistance, calculated in every throne room that considered defying a superior force. Titles do not negotiate with tactics. Tradition does not stop siege engines. Sacred authority does not deflect arrows. When systems collide, the one that adapts survives. The one that does not becomes a case study. And some case studies echo for centuries. The Mongols did not need to destroy Baghdad. They needed everyone else to know they could, and would. And exactly what would happen to rulers who believed position made them immune. That message outlasted the empire that delivered it, because what happened in February 1258 was not just war, it was communication. written in smoke, in stone, and in bodies wrapped tight enough to leave no blood behind. A warning that travelled faster and farther than any army ever could. And some warnings, once learned, never need repeating. What you just heard wasn't meant to be comfortable. If you think stories like this deserve to stay visible, press like so it doesn't disappear. Subscribe if you want more chapters. History prefers ignored. And tell me in the comments, what part stayed with you the longest?